Hello, welcome to the making of Super VHS. If you don't know what that is, why Super VHS is a game that I made, it's the RedLetterMedia warehouse and you can just walk around. We actually just had a trailer drop at Gamescom. Let's check it out.
It's a new world from a brand new team that has a bold vision. Let's check this out.
I love it. The most interesting thing about it is that it's super accurate to the real world warehouse and the stuff that's in it. Accurate enough that it might end up as evidence in a future trial. We're going to go through how this started, all the different workflows of making the stuff in it. We'll check out all the rooms and the props and the textures. We'll sort of cover how I spent, a couple months sort of in the walls, just sort of scuttling around, being a little guy. This is going to be a long one, so grab a little snack, grab a nice little drink, get nice and cozy, tuck your feet in. Anyway, yeah, this is how I made the thing.
What is this? What is this?
I started this all in April last year, April 2021, and it's because of the thumbnail for this episode. Something about the Plinkett board and this framing with Rich and Mike, something caught my eye and it really stood out to me as like a real physical item that occupied a real space. Simple afternoon 3D model thing where I could make it just for fun. The original idea was not to make a game or release anything or make the whole warehouse or anything like that. If this thumbnail was different, I wouldn't have started any of it. I wouldn't have spent like over a year of my life just neglecting personal relationship. That's how it started, a one-off Plinkett board model, and the 3ds Max file for the entire project is still just called Plinkett board, version 100 and something, because that's all it was going to be. I ended up having modeled a few more things, and then at a certain point I was like, I've got enough here that if I could get this in Unreal, I could walk around in VR, and that'd be fun to see that. Once I figured out that part, it was like, I could probably put together something cool enough that you could release it and, people would get a kick out of it, until it occurred to me, that's a small audience. And in fact, the majority of the way the majority of people would interact with this thing would just be in the standard like FPS first person flat screen thing. So I'll do a version like that as well. Once I started having to figure that out, that opens the door then to like, I need UI elements. I need a way to show that this item is interactable and this one is not. And so now I can put labels on these items, and now you pick it up and I want to move around, but also inspect it. So those elements of the design, the overall shape of the project sort of, it came together while I was making it. And so all of the gameplay parts, the tape collecting, the interactable TV, going outside, those were all on the fly decisions as to how to put in some kind of structure for a player, some mechanism to move the player around. The way I added things to the project was like, it'd be cool if you could watch tapes on the TV. It'd be cool if you could go outside. It'd be cool if a Space Cop's gun was in there. It'd be cool if you could shoot it. You have to be able to smash bottles. And so each of those was a different technical challenge that I had to figure out along the way. Getting it into Unreal versus doing all the modeling, it would be like a 70-30 split. 70-30 just making all the assets, 30-30 in Unreal, which is, you'd want to spend way more time developing the game systems side of it. So speaking of all the assets, so I made them all from scratch. There are no stock models or anything like that, or anything that's kind of like a lookalike or is just close enough. All of the textures, wherever possible, that pull from screenshots, or like if I had to have photos from the set, anything to get the actual textures. But it would sometimes be the case that you couldn't get a high enough quality look at or reference of whatever the actual thing would be. So in those instances, I remade the textures from stock texture assets. But yeah, so it was all made by hand. One of the things that comes along when you're pursuing this kind of accuracy to a real world thing that you're actually not a part of is this consideration that these are strangers' personal lives. I spent a lot of time thinking about whether this is like a weird thing to do or not. And the way I sort of considered that was that this game, this project, is about RedLetterMedia, the show, the things they make, the shows they do. It's not about Red Letter Media, the staff, the people who make the show, the guys, their personal lives. It's important to me to be clear about boundaries there and to be clearly respectful of the privacy of the people involved. So a lot of people have asked about the screening room or where they keep all the tapes. So part of the reason none of that's in the game is the warehouse is part of the show. The warehouse is the setting that the show takes place in. So that was going to be the bounds of what I made. I know the screening room does appear, but that space, though it does appear on camera, it also has a kitchen. There are offices there, I'm sure. To me, for some reason, it felt like that might be intruding on these strangers' lives in a way that I didn't think would be cool, or there's something uncomfortable about it. It's important to not be a weirdo, I think, like just be normal. Like even making the gun shoot, how appropriate is that? Because it's like, put yourself in their shoes. It's like a stranger shows up and is like, hello, I made a workplace violence simulator for you. And it's like, that's fucking weird, man. Like, it was important to me to both be not fucked up, like in intention and in the execution, to like not make this weird boundary crossing parasocial, like weird friend simulator thing. And to also in it to not encourage that in the people who play it as well. That's why the game there's a slight layer of fiction to the whole thing. Like the gun actually being able to shoot lasers, the fact that you can go outside and it's just a snowy wasteland, and the building is the only thing that exists. It's just the slightest amount of distance from reality and from strangers' personal lives, which it's no one's business. I don't know that it was perfectly successful in doing that. To some degree, this is a weird thing to do. But I hope that it stayed on the right side of being thorough, but fun and respectable, and with clear boundaries. Like just don't be weird. Just don't be weird. Just don't be weird. So here's the game. If you're old enough, you'll recognize this sound. This song is called "I Squeeze Gats" by Charlie Brown Beats. I think it's a remix of a turnaround section from a Otis Redding song called Shake, and then a Notorious B.I.G. sample. I should say I'm not a game dev. I'm not an expert in any of this. So take anything you see here with like a huge grain of salt. These menu videos here, these were captured in Engine, and then I took them into Resolve and gave them a pretty heavy VHS style look. A lot of halation and grain and jittery effects. So this intro, this card here, I thought that it needed some small framing device, just a tiny bit of context to set the tone for what the game is kind of like. So it's kind of funny. It gives you a time and place, and it gives you a little hint as to what it's about, which is just the tapes. And the other thing about it is it lets you know that you're not playing as any one of the RLM guys. You're not sneaking inside there. It's not a weird. Anyway. Cut to. So you start here. This is technically version 1.2. The most useful change is that you can right click or left trigger, to zoom in. Getting it to start playing the song at the top, stop when the ball stops moving, and then play the loser sound effect. And it doesn't work properly every time, and I don't know why. Here's the blueprints for that. And it's all happening on the ball, which maybe that's a dumb way to do it. I'm not sure. But basically, if the ball hits the pegs, play just a generic peg sound. But then there's a collision box at the top of the Plinkett board. And once we pass through that, start playing the song. And then we're just checking if the speed of the ball drops below whatever value, stop the music that you started playing and play the losing sound effect. It works most of the time, but then sometimes it doesn't stop the song, even though it then plays the losing sound. I don't know enough about it. So I was fucking crossing my fingers when I saw them play that that it would work properly. It wouldn't bug out. There's a bug here, which I saw everyone encounter, and it's that you can throw the bottle and it works pretty good, right? Usually it's it's throws. There's a problem where if you get the angle just right, there, It doesn't throw, it just gets stuck in midair. I couldn't figure out why that was, but it is something to do with if the camera for the player character is angled slightly up or slightly down, the bottle gets stuck in space like that. When you pick up an object, collision and physics and gravity gets turned off. When you throw it, all that stuff gets turned back on. So it's something to do with that, gravity and physics and not getting turned back on. I could not solve it. So these are the blueprints. It's like a typical setup. And pick up the item gets attached to the play and you turn off the physics and blah, blah, blah. And then on throw, it gets detached and you turn on collision and gravity and physics, blah, blah. It's like a standard thing, and apply an impulse out and up and give it a random tumble. I thought maybe it had something to do with the player collision capsule, like if there was some overlap or something happening there, but I don't know what the problem is with it. Missing obviously from the review set areas, the chairs. I wish I had done them. I mean, to be honest, I just ran out of energy. Something I don't think anyone noticed is if you go in here, when you step in this area, there's a vignette in their review videos. They usually have this vignette that they apply in post. So just a little one fades in. Stupid detail, I don't think anyone noticed. Stupid detail, I don't think. Speaking of stupid details, if you listen, sometimes, randomly, a little bell sound will play. There it is. I don't think anyone noticed that. It's from in the early Half in the Bag episodes, this random little bell sound would play.
I think I watched the non-theatrical cut. I hesitate to say director's cut.
No one knew what the hell why it's there. I don't think anyone knows why that happens. A few people started to go off the rails, and we're trying to put together hidden messages based on the word or the vowel sound or the letter that the bell played against, which is madness, obviously. It's a stock sound from Final Cut, and it means nothing in the game. I don't know. I think Mike is the only person who spotted that's Colin comped onto the box there on the front, but he's also here on the back. Much worse job. So to get the gun, obviously you have to pick up all 50 tapes, which you can do in like 2 minutes. It's not that big of a deal, but that would be irritating. So hidden underneath here is this button. And then obviously is a cue from Zelda, but so that unlocks the gun. If you for some reason played this again, you don't have to do all the tape thing to get the gun. And the way of communicating that to the player, like the other stuff, is a post-it note. But I don't think it works very well, because what I noticed is when playing, a lot of people would just do this. They'd just grab the gun and keep moving. And they didn't really notice that there was a note behind it. I only just now realized how weird that reflection is. I guess because it's happening in screen space. That does not look good. I think I saw one person notice this. The sounds of the gun mixed in with the obvious Star Wars laser sounds. There are a few that have a little extra something, which is Rich Evans' incredible laugh. But it sounds kind of believable as a laser gun. I made sure you had some satisfying sounds for picking up and inspecting and dropping stuff. And that includes specific ones for handling the tapes. They have their own pick up, inspect, drop, throw sounds. There's these three sounds, and the way I recorded these is I just had my wallet on the table, and I just recorded a couple takes of reaching out and grabbing it at different speeds and with different kind of impacts. So you end up with the VHS tapes are the same sound, that same grabbing sound, but combined with I didn't have any VHS tapes on hand for some reason, so I had a friend record me some audio of him grabbing and shaking a tape.
Tape samples, TDK tape 1.
And so you combine the previous grab sound with the VHS sound and you get this. VHS impact dropping sounds. And then for the throw, some of the more rattly VHS sounds that sound like it's spinning in the air. Here's the event graph for the item pickup. So you can see like various checks and branches for whatever you're picking up, checking to see if you're allowed to pick it up yet, what happens when you pick it up, what sound should play, what UI elements should roll on, setting different variables, counting the VHS tapes, removing them from the pool when you pick up one. I don't really know what I'm doing, and it's barely organized. Much better practices, and I'm sure better ways you could figure out of doing these things. So inspecting items, but making it so that the rotation is always relative to the direction the camera is. Because initially you'd start the inspect, and as soon as you started tumbling the item, it would always be relative to the world orientation, not the orientation of the player. So I had to figure out how to fix that. Zooming in and out. And then also being able to click and drag for a pan the object around. A lot of the time in the blueprint stuff was spent figuring out UI stuff. Like it's very, I didn't think it would be this complicated, but determining which UI elements should show up, depending on if you're holding something and looking at something, if the thing you're looking at you can interact with, like all of the different variations of UI that you have to call, it became kind of complicated. I don't feel confident that I did that in the best way. A lot of line tracing stuff, which is pretty standard. You know, I wanted to have it so that when you inspect an object, your focus falls off nicely when you're zooming in and out. A bit of like a vignette as well, just drawing attention to the object. Ended up doing that through this node, make camera focus settings. We're using a cine camera for the player character. The only part of the door art here that isn't accurate to the real world stuff is the newspapers at the bottom, because, you know, no chance of finding like local Milwaukee newspaper. I just put silly stuff in there instead, which seems kind of appropriate, like spooky ghost and space aliens and booze related. So this website here is, I don't think it's online anymore. You have to go through like archive to find it. But it was a website that they had running. These books here are ones that have appeared, you know, that do appear on the set. Some of these were kind of hard to hunt down. This UI text at the bottom there is dialogue from the TV show Patriot.
12 husk nuts to each girdle jerry, while flex tandems press a task apparatus of 10 vertically composited patch amplers.
The TV kind of works how I wanted it. I wish the functionality was a bit better. There are things like when you switch videos, the previous video is there for a frame, which can get confusing. You might think that it's not switching. And it can play the same video twice in a row because it's just randomly selecting from an array. I tried to get it to work so that once it did select a video, it would tag that as being no longer an option, but I couldn't get it working. That's just a rec light there with a texture in it. Definitely helps the vibe, as well as these dynamic shadows. That's the proper label. It's from a screenshot. A weird thing is like there's no VCR players in the entire game. It's like an obvious oversight. It makes way more sense that you would put the tape into a VCR player rather than the game logic of just be holding it while you interact with an object. It would have been cooler if I did it that way. But anyway, yeah, so if you're holding it, you walk over, turn the TV on, and it plays like 25 minutes of Night Court. Quick sort of comparison renders, just eyeballing the camera placement and focal length. It's not perfect, but it's pretty close. One of the biggest differences in the comparison is the lighting, and that's because in the game, the warehouse, it's not lit for any particular show or setup. It's just generic warehouse lighting. When they're shooting any of the, you know, different shows that they do, I would guess they would have the warehouse mostly blacked out and their specific lighting arrangements for each show. So in the game, the majority of the lighting is baked. There are a few dynamic lights placed around areas of interaction so that you would see, it's subtle, but you would get dynamic shadows on items as you pick them up. But for the most part, it's baked lighting. In the game, it has much more of an ambient kind of feel. They have these two big key lights that they use to light themselves when they're on set there and it's not there. You also have way more of the letter lights are doing way more in the scene than they do. Maybe it's a little too much, the letter lighting. One of the things that came later was putting the little flashes of color behind the set that you can see in the curtain. They definitely help make it feel familiar. This is the beginning of that. So I just got a pretty square front-on image of the board, and then just built the geometry right over the top of it. And so one of the ways that you get the scale though is it has to have 10 VHS tapes. And you can get the dimensions of a VHS tape. So then, you know, you have like a pretty good idea of what the dimensions should be. And there's a mistake on this that I did not correct. These pegs, the most outer layer, they're just chrome. They don't have the purple base. So I really fucked that up. Here's a render from that kind of period there. This is a generic warehouse HDRI. You know, then I was like, okay, I'll just build a generic warehouse layout, you know, so I can render this board in. And it looked like something like this. But even then I had still made the railing. Well, this is going to be a problem. I'm going to keep doing this process of making it a little more accurate and a little more accurate. So the warehouse now is in a reasonably constructed state. Most of the overall layout is there. So this is the way I started the building process, and you'll see this a lot. It's a process that I did over and over again, and that is the use of perspectively corrected textures as layout guides or as position guides or scale guides. So for example, this back or side wall of the warehouse, which has the stairs on it, I've got this image. They have these time-lapse videos when they are constructing sets, and they'll often give you a wide angle, which you can then use, you know. So once you've got a good angle like this, you square everything up as best you can, make sure the aspect ratio is correct, like circles should be circles. You're trying to make it as orthographic as possible, which is not, it's not perfect. Like if you can see the perspective shift happening here, right? Like this outer edge of the stairs is not useful for lining the stairs up. Only this inner part is, where it's close to the wall. Anyway, once you've got that in place, you just start building the geometry over the top of it. So you can see, if I slide this out of the way, you can see that's what I'm doing. Lining up the doors. See where the cutouts for the doors are in place. The stair railing, where the garage stuff should go. Things become relatively accurate in relation to each other. There still is work to do to determine, or to make sure that the global accuracy, the global dimensions are there. So the same thing. So if I grab this texture, and then if we just slide this out of the way, you can see same thing. The door cutout is in place, and the garage railing. Yeah, see, like I'm lining the garage rails right up over where they should be. Beyond that as well, you also count the number of bricks that make up the height of the door, and then count specifically, is it a whole brick, or have we got a half brick? What is the pattern inside there? How many across the top? And we can see up here, the very edge point where the ceiling railing connects. This is enough sort of to give you an idea of the spacing of the railing, and you can continue that across the entire breadth of the warehouse. Here is a concession I made because I thought I had got it wrong. But the way the spacing worked out and the way I had counted it, you ended up with, there's like a beam that's right above the stairs. And I was like, that's crazy. That can't be right. So I shortened it. I don't know, maybe that's the way they've done it. Until there is a moment. Let me just look it up. Yeah, so this one, Wheel of the Worst 13. There is a stupid rail there. If you're standing there, it's right at your eye level. So if you try the VR version of this, right as you're standing at the top there's a rail right at your eye line, and it's like, who would design this? Why would you? It's to go under and around it. One of the other things about it is that the sets change over time. They change over time as they do different stuff, as they destroy things, but they would change also just as they tear them down and put them back up. So what's ended up in the game is kind of an average of some, but it's also sort of restricted to the time period of wherever I had the best reference. It's the same thing for like the Plinkett set, built off of this texture. So you can see the placement of everything is right over the top of where it is on the real thing. So accuracy wise, it's pretty close. The process with everything in this to not make it on the grid, you know, snapping everything to sort of perfect alignment. Look at the door frame. The real one is like there's gaps and shit all over the place. Like that, it's misaligned. Same deal with everything. Like the doorknob size and the position is like it's got. If you're gonna do it, you got to do it right. You know, so everything's got to be exactly where it should. I didn't do this thing because I couldn't be fucking bothered. As Mike pointed out, you know, the way these things are constructed are the way the real ones are constructed. Like they're separate wood beams at the back. I found whatever this company's like foil sheathing thing is, this John Mayer foil stuff, and that's the back of a separate piece of wood, which is makes up the front facing wall panels, you know, and nothing's aligned because these sets get bumped into, like there's gaps everywhere. They have, you know, they lean, all of that kind of stuff. The floor's the same. The real one is 8 separate panels that they put together, and so they're not flush with each other. You know, they don't line up properly. I spent so long searching like flowery wallpaper, vintage wallpaper, retro wallpaper, places in stores that sell wallpaper in Milwaukee. I was searching online for this pattern because I didn't want to have to remake it. But I ended up remaking it because there was no other way to do it. It took ages, and it was one of the first things I shared from this project. And it looks pretty fucking good. Like, that's pretty close, right? That blood texture, it is a screenshot, or I might have painted over one, but it is the real thing. You could find or buy like a stock asset that kind of matches this kind of thing, but that's not it doesn't cut it. Like, something that's close is not good enough. It's got to be the real deal. The place where like a lot of these ended up turning up is actually on eBay. You know, there's a ton of good reference for what the actual object is like. Sometimes you will get lucky enough and have someone will put a tape measure on it. And then it's like, all right, bang, there's the dimensions of this thing. Reconstructing the clock face, paint out the hands because I make the hands actual geometry. This is the exact weather station thing. The little 2-1 that's next to the Home Sweet Home sign. You know, like this is like perfect for figuring out sort of the rough size of stuff. Not a single person should look this closely at these things. But I didn't realize how deranged it was at the time. Triple weather station is the same thing. This is over to the right. Again, it's like these absolute legends who take this close-up detail and put tape measures on them. It's so useful. So it's just cleaning up the needles, you know, making the textures for them. And it's like, this is way too much detail for anything. Certainly no one has ever looked at this. You know, that one's got its own gold needle thing, but it's there and it's correct. There's a photo you can see where it's like, you can see that it says Zenith on it. It's like, okay. If you search that up, you can find like this thing, this radio thing, model turntable thing, but that's the exact one there. Like, there's lots of other, I mean, they all look like shit. Why would you have this in your house? Yeah. Dimensions. That's the important part. This little clock radio thing is the same thing as what's in the show. You can see the badge from some angles. So if you just search up like vintage Thomas antique radio thing, you'll find it. These pills, they're, you know, you see them all over the set. They're a fun little thing. This is, to me, is borderline too referential to the real people in the show, but it's like funny enough. I think you can get by, even though it has their names, you know. One of the super frustrating thing was the Home Sweet Home sign. I spent so much time like trying to reverse image search little portion, like the little house and little bits and pieces of it, or looking through endless pages of like home wall knick-knack things. I just couldn't. It's like, you know, it's probably some weird one-off thing. Couldn't find it. Had to make it from scratch. But this is sort of the best I could find. And it's not high enough res to use as a texture. So you just trace over the thing, you know, to make the make your own version at a stupidly high res version size, and it doesn't look very good. Like these look pretty shitty compared to what the real things would be. But that's that. So if anyone needs a you know, like an 8K home sweet home texture thing, hit me up. This art that's on the Plinkett set on the wall there. So that is, you know, that is the real texture. Just different screen grabs that expose sort of the closest thing. But I would have loved to have found the, you know, the source of that. And the closest I came to was this guy. This guy's style is super similar. You know, maybe it's like a knockoff of his style or something. Where is it? There's a particular image that's, yeah, it's this one, right? Like that, it's so, you know, look at the shape of these, the shapes, right? Where the trees go, this thing, it's got to be base. There's a barrel. The sun is kind of in the same spot. The sunsets look a bit like nuclear blasts or something to me. They creep me out. I don't know. Like it's so foggy. They're so atmospheric. I find it a bit frightening. On that Patreon, which you should subscribe to get all kinds of behind the scenes tips and tricks, inside scoops, leaks, recipes. One of the things I like about it, for as ironic or cynical as, like, you know, online shit can be, there's like a lot of sincere effort gets put into a lot of parts of the show. One of them being all of the props and stuff that Rich makes. It's just a cool thing. It's just cool. But anyway, there's a making of this table video which has the dimensions in it. And I believe it's 8 foot by 4 foot. Don't have the height. You have to sort of estimate it. And this is the basics of what the structural sort of layout of the table is like underneath here. It's a bit more complicated in the real thing, but no one's ever going to look here. So, and that includes this weird, like, there's like a magnet system hovering, keeping this wheel in place. It's fucking crazy. I can't believe he came up with that. So to do the letters for it, this is how I did the lettering for every piece of signage that's in the show. Tried to find the best reference images I could of a square front-on view of the letter. And then using like a spline tool, you just trace it, you know? So you trace all along the outside, and then, you know, you can extrude them out and turn them into geometry. And so I do that for all letters. And so here's an early render looking at just when I was working on what the metal texture and material should look like. And I think this is pretty good. You can see I punched all the holes out. There's one of the things in this project is the more doors of accuracy open up, there's more you find that there's shit behind them that you have to do as well, right? So these globes have to connect to something inside the holes, right? And then behind the letters, there's got to be something. And I didn't do this, but initially, like, I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to run cables behind for power and stuff, and you'd have cables running along the floor and all that stuff. And your girlfriend is going to leave you if you try to do the electrical cabling in this stupid warehouse. Added the globes on, off. That glass is actually, you know, it has a hollow space inside there because it's a bulb, and there are filaments inside, which are the things that actually light up. And in Unreal, it is the same way. There's a light source inside of a proper glass bulb because it looks better to do it that way. You don't have, it's not performant, and it makes your computer run like shit, but it looks cool. One of the important things about doing all this tracing by hand, like going over the actual letter forms instead of using a typeface or whatever, is the real world was full of imperfections and bumps and dents and knocks and shit like that. Like these, and the placement of these bulbs, you know, like they're not centered. This thing was made by hand, you know. These tape stacks behind the best of the worst set, labels that are on here are they're just random. If you could get better reference for that, this would have been something that you could make look a bit nicer. They're just on these wooden planks that you can wheel into place, and the tape ends sort of slot together. And then behind them, I made these little LED light boxes that they would use to splash that colored light on the curtains behind there. These back panels are the same as the real things, which is like this piece and then this piece slapped on the front of it. And they're like these modular, movable, reusable wall panels that they can, like you'll see them when they make the Halloween sets, they're often using these things. One of the hard things to figure out here was how deep the set goes. This is a good pano that I stitched together of a panning shot. But the thing about it is, I don't know the absolute size of anything in the frame. I don't know for sure the dimensions, so you need to rely on other things to sort of give you the ballpark and then continue to finesse it as you work along. Here you can see, so I'm building a new texture based off of the sample high-res wood that I was able to get that is close to what the VCR set looks like. And obviously, so you have to spend a lot of time painting out seams and replacing areas where that's mirrored or you can see obvious cloning and stuff like that. You always are revisiting it, especially once you end up in Unreal and you start adding lights to the scene and it has to work in real time. The color is always getting a little bit tweaked. I check against a bunch of different episodes, particularly because the earlier episodes, which might have a lot of good reference, the cameras they're using and the pipeline for their color isn't as good or as accurate as it is in later episodes. So it's always having to sample from multiple references to get what feels like an accurate representation of what your eye would see. For basically all people who like RedLetterMedia, the holy grail is this bear painting. Many have tried to recreate it. I spent ages searching, try reverse image search it. Nothing comes up. It's probably just like a one-off thing that they found under a bridge somewhere. The texture that ended up in the game is the highest res I could pull from any screenshot. I tried a bunch of AI upscale things, and some of them do make a sharper image, but it became too far out from actually what texture actually is as far as we can tell. There's been a bunch of people who have painted this, and some have got pretty close to what the actual texture looks like. That's why in the storage room, there's a prototype version, which is someone else's painting. A friend of mine made a version, which is, it's not supposed to be a replica, but I think it's neat. And it's just a little nod to how many times the community has tried to make this thing and wants to know what it is and see it. I would love to get a high-res picture of this texture and would absolutely update the game with it. So here, this time lapse, you can see a bit of the perspective correction that I did, or the way I did it, and comparing it with multiple views on the same wall. Because again, ultimately, it's the same way we did the other stuff. This is going to end up as a reference texture, and we're going to build the geometry according to it, or at least help us refine where things should go. Ideally, you'd use the real textures wherever you can, but for the walls, the VCR set walls, I recreated them by hand instead. It has to hold up to a kind of a close inspection, so to speak, particularly in VR, because you're sticking your head wherever you want. So I knew I had to make some stuff I had to make at a high enough res. Getting the color tone right for these walls also took a bit of finessing, because they have, once you sort of account for the way that, the different white balances from different shots, the VCR set walls, you see them in the context of the warehouse walls. And so what is making sure that they had the same relationship of color temperature, but also luminance to each other. it's the same thing as everything else. Like we're counting the number of bricks. We're looking at where we're starting on a half brick or a full brick. We're seeing where the seams in the wall panels are, which is the way all of this constructed. None of this is arbitrary. It was all based off of, actual reference. It took a long time to get this right because the texture scaling then shows you where you were a little off on the geometry maybe. It's a super iterative process. This section, there's an offset in the wall panels, the way they are aligned with each other. Maybe they painted it themselves, because why else would you? But all of that's in there properly. This is one of the cats listed in the credits, and that appears in the monitor. She loves coffee, and her name is Magnitude. A good example of the accuracy process. When I blocked in these shelves, just eyeballing their size based on, because I had already done the walls, and I'm counting the size of the bricks here, blah, 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 making sure that they're all correct. There's a little, always get this little sliver with the next to the door that fill the top of the set with right assembly, getting all that stuff. There's instructions for shelves, and it's like those shelves instructions are probably the shelves over here, right? And so you start just searching for shelf instruction manuals and clicking through millions of those until you find something similar. And it's like that there are a lot of shelves that have very similar manuals, and they look almost exactly the same, but that's pretty close, right? You could use that, right? But it's not the exact one. It's like dark filling here, and there's these next to it is this thing, right? And that's not the same. There's like a 3-piece thing, and this is light. It's not filled in, but it's pretty close, right? So it's like, is it a different version of these? And then eventually I came across the Edsel SR100E after looking at a million different manual things. And it's this, right? And it's like, okay, that's pretty good. There's a dark thing there. They're dark. The way the text comes off it, there's the square bracket looking thing here. So that's the exact one. So one, that's great, because now I can use this on the board, and it's the exact correct thing. And I can get the dimensions off it. So then to one point of this story is that the dimensions of the real one versus the eyeballed based on the rest of my measurements version, I was off by, I think it was less than 2 centimeters, which is less than an inch. That is the way I choose to spend my time. But that means, you're pretty confident about the size of everything else. Realize that until doing this. I've never seen them like that. Like when I grew up, I never saw them like that. I always only saw tapes that came out from the long side. And so I made them all this way, which makes some of them technically wrong. So what I would do is just go through and try and find like the highest res scans I could find. Takes a little digging, but you could usually find it. And then also write on the label what the tape is, like it was back in the day, how you used to do it. And the goal for all of these tapes, like all of the textures, is I wanted you to be able to read everything. So some people have asked about this. So what happened here is this, I could not find the back cover for this. You can find lots of high-res other imagery of these dudes. I just had this moment of like, how much time do you want to spend on this thing? Like, who is this for? Like, I was just despairing. Like, that's why this text is here that says, why am I doing this? It's like, I just settled on this picture of the dudes looking sexy. So my spirit had just disconnected from reality, and I was just floating away. And some people noticed a handful of the tapes in the game weren't ones that they recognized, including this one, Cannibal Airlines, and this one, Wizard Vigilante. And that's because these aren't real movies. These two are fake tapes made by Rob Schrab, who is a writer, director, artist. You might know his comic Scud, the Disposable Assassin, but he's worked on tons of stuff. One of the things he makes is these giant, oversized VHS tapes, these fake movies or movies that don't really exist. They're super genre and they have kind of like a B movie feel to them. And they're always kind of funny and interesting. And he does his beautiful art on the front. When I was coming up with lists of tapes to put in the game, I remembered these because Schreiber's also from Wisconsin and he's a RedLetterMedia fan. And I remembered he has these fake tapes and it's like that would be perfectly the kind of thing that would exist in the fake RedLetterMedia warehouse universe.
Now, this is a totally fake tape created by actor, writer, producer Rob Schraub.
This one has fake pictures on the back. That's Bill Hader from something.
This particular one, Cannibal Airlines, it does appear in 10 Cloverfield Lane, but outside of that, it's not a real thing. These are the only ones that I could find good enough images of the back as well to make proper tapes. It would have been cool to dress them. I also don't want to take too much of the guy's work and use it for my own ends. That is similar to the Starcadian stuff that other people noticed. These are actually albums. So I took the album art and just reshaped it a little bit to fit into a VHS tape. That music's fucking awesome. You should check it out. If you like sound, you should check this. You should Starcadian. Check it out. Same thing. Putting the logos and stuff around. This is a short film. This Starcadian thing. This is a short film, but it's also a song. And so I gave that. That's with put some screen caps from there. It's a really cool clip. The reason I put his music in there is because it's fucking cool, but also they are kind of soundtracks, but for movies that don't exist, but maybe that should exist. And so they kind of, they're very it's very genre kind of stuff. And so it fits in the fictional warehouse world that these would be real movies. So that's why they're in there. This looks like a movie. I want to watch this movie. So this is what the artwork usually looks like. And speaking of the vinyl, I haven't actually opened it yet. There's the artwork for that tape. This is his most recent album. It's fucking mint. Not to get too sidetracked for a second, but one of the things that strikes me when I listen to his music is there's so much hard work put into it. There's so much effort put into the production and the arrangement and all the harmony, all the different sounds, all the song structure. And it's this mix of electronic synthesizer stuff. I don't want to call it synthwave or whatever, but then there'll be a few tracks that are orchestral and arranged with strings, and they're beautiful. There's so much effort goes into the production, but it's easy not to notice because the focus on melody and song is so strong. All the other stuff never gets in the way of, a good song or a good melody. Space Cop is not on VHS, obviously, surprisingly. So I had to make up, so it's just the DVD cover, but because the dimensions are different, I did the true hack fraud thing and just it's just this top image and then mirrored it and put it underneath, which I think is that's in keeping with what, that makes sense. That's fine. Obviously you got to put beer in the game and they have to be beers that they actually have on set. You can find most of these labels online for the body, and then often for the neck label I would just remake, with the right typeface and whatever imagery they used. It's the sign that appears on the wheel after they throw it in the trash. It gets rejected and gets this little sign put in it. And I was like, that would be fun to make. This is before I knew I was going to be a whole thing. I had an inkling that I might do more of this. I might make more stuff. This is another thing. It was luckily someone in the comments pointed out, I forget where I saw it, but someone pointed out there was just a over a Popeyes box. So you can see when you look at the video where that weird video where they eat chicken, for some reason, you can see Popeyes logo is still underneath the box, and it's visible texture as well, of course. But the useful part of that is that meant I could search for Popeyes boxes that were square and looked to be sort of roughly the right size. They had this logo, the holes there, and the where the Popeyes text goes around. Because I just didn't know the dimensions, and I didn't know what the folding flap mechanism looked like. So I spent ages searching for that. And then eventually found, I was looking at food reviews from 2008 on YouTube. It was it's so weird.
Boy, do I love.
So eventually I found some old pictures from, I think from a travel blog where someone had a square box with the offset logo and the speed holes where they should be. And it's like, this is the kind of detail that like is truly incriminating when they come to press charge. That's the beer labels for the Half in the Bag intro. So they made their own little label. I could not find a high enough res or a close enough image of what the actual label is. You can see this part, the cheap beer part, and so that's the correct font and everything. And you can see the 12 ounces thing. But I'm just guessing at what it's like. There's some kind of beer up in there, and it says wouldn't say very cool, but what else am I supposed to write, right? Like, I do even like the channel if you don't mindlessly parrot their shit. When I was trying to find the texture for this, for the popcorn bags, I found this bag with this logo on Amazon somewhere. There it is. That's the fresh popcorn. Yeah, so that's the right bag because I wanted to buy it because it would give me like a good image reference. So I did buy it, and it took ages to get here. And then they sent, but it's the wrong. So I left an absolutely insane review. I found like a high enough res image off somewhere, I don't know, and then cleaned it up a bit. It's the exact ladder that they have in the warehouse, and it's like the point is not to be creepy and weird. That happens naturally, incidentally. Fuck. Often what I do is I'd skip through each episode and just watch the start and the end. Because if they're doing a skit type thing, that's where you might get to see a glance at the rest of the studio. And in one of them, you can see the brand. So I know that, and I know how many steps it is, and I know it's got got a black plastic top and a black tray thing. So you just start looking for those, right? So like, all right, so we're browsing Werner ladders, and I know I need one with 9 steps. Like, we're having a look. It's a silver ladder. It's got a black top thing on it and a little tray. I cannot believe how much time I spent doing this. So I keep scrolling. There's none of these. Any of these? No. Nope. None of these. No. Right. Silver things. Got the black things. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 steps. It's got the sticker things in the right spot. All that stuff is there. That's the same. So, all right, this is the ladder. Once I know the height of this ladder, that means, when I'm trying to figure out, when I'm double checking and triple checking how high the Plinkett board should be, it's relative to the steps, So you're constantly comparing stuff. Space Cop's laser rifle. This is it in Substance, which is where I textured it. The first thing I did in Substance was the Space Cop headquarters, and that was the first time I ever used that software, which it turns out I like it, it's fun. And then I did this. And if you're going to do it properly, you should really you should have textured way more stuff in there this way, rather than the terrible garbage way I did the other stuff, like a hack fraud. Like, I don't do any of this, this stuff is all just self-taught. I am a compositor, but, I don't do really much 3D stuff. So if you're looking at this and you're like, that's terrible, that's bad, what a bad way to do this, holy shit, what is wrong with you? I agree. So just, spend a while searching to figure out which body matched the base of this. And it's this zombie strike thing. So once I had that, and there's this cool reference of them making the gun. But it's even here, you can see this isn't in the prop. This thing is plastic bits on the side change. The fill-in on this little thing, that goes away. Yeah, so you can see they just covered it up with some foil, which I think rocks. A nice close-up on some of the details there, which are all in there. Check everything's square and circle as it should be. Start lining up. You can get the scale from wherever. And then you start building the geo. And again, I'm not the modeling and the texturing, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm figuring it out on the fly. So there's way better ways. This is terrible. The workflow's bad. All of that stuff is almost certainly true. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but you're just building one half. because then you can mirror it later to finish it. The Space Cop editions, the greebly stuff that they add, we'll build them because it's non-symmetrical, so we'll build them later. Please disregard the giant R2 units in the background. Working on the still working on the way the scratches should fall and how dirt should build up on this. What are the outermost surfaces of this that are going to get scratched and touch stuff? What parts are going to stay clean? All that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying I did a great job at that, but those are the things you should think about when you're what the hell is that? When you're making this, painting the little blues, making sure that they get the wear as well. And we got those red. Got to paint those red things. Yeah, and just spraying it on. And again, always like it's going outside the lines a little there, but we're gonna erase it later. But always the thing keeping in mind for this kind of project, it's shaped by someone's hand. The prop was made by just some dudes. But then it gets handled a lot. So like perfection is not that it's not interesting and it's not accurate. So bringing in some cleaning swirls, because there's dirt and scratches and grime, and then it's cleaned, and then it gets dirty over the top of that and it gets cleaned. Well, I mean, Space Cop probably doesn't clean that often. But you build in layers and layers of history. If you can imagine the history of the item, a lot of the panel details and stuff I didn't model. It makes sense instead to do them as part of a normals pass, which is just there's the reference for the actual prop. Just punching in those kind of details there. So we got to do the Space Cop headquarters model, which is made by Jim and Cohen from Canada. And they made the ring at the top from this Indiana Jones DVD. You can obviously get the dimensions of a DVD, and then you can see whereabouts the drill bit touches there. So that's what you want to have. We want to end up with that, and you can see it's not perfectly aligned, so we better have that too. There's our size. Right, so here we can line up. Make sure all the textures end up in the right spot. And the correct scale. So once you have the rings they used, we can get the inner ball scale thing, right? And then from there you can start kind of eyeballing what the rest of, how big everything else is. So you just go through and start making it piece by piece. And it took ages, but it also didn't take that long. This is the thing. This would be. I think it's ended up pretty accurate, compared to the real model. But that would have been great to have a bit more of a definitive idea of what the size of things were, and a closer look at the textures, and closer look at all this little like greebling detail in here, which is really cool. But it's hard to be super accurate. So yeah, it's like just making a series of discs, different flat sphere shapes. Put the windows in. Keep modeling. Don't know what I'm doing. It's just a bad way to do it. Who knows? Probably. In fact, I'm sure this might end up causing tons of problems later when it comes to texturing it. Initially, I wanted it to be raining outside because I love rainy weather, and I wanted the game to have a cozy feel. But the problem was there's no windows or anything, so how could you tell that it would be raining? So then the idea came about that maybe you could go outside rather than it be raining. It's snowy in Milwaukee. it also became a little spot where I could do something a bit more creative rather than the strict confines of the RedLetterMedia stuff. So you have this thing where you step outside and it's this kind of strange ambience where it's lonely and there is stuff out on the horizon, but there's nothing really else for a while. It's cold and blue, and then when you step back in the warehouse, it's warm again. That was kind of the feeling I wanted to have. But then as the gameplay loop part progressed of the game, there's a reason to go outside, and it's to grab the last tape and finish the game. But because it's this empty nothingness, I needed a simple way to signpost for the player. Hey, look over here, and it's a literal light. It's also another little moment to just to create a visual scene, a visual feeling of like a lonely, just fading out into fog landscape with a single light post in it. Zooming out, it's just a few of Niagara particle systems in Unreal, just with these flat sprites that are kind of cloudy and then falling snow. So the way I did it, you can see around the immediate area of the warehouse. It's raining behind me, by the way. I modeled some kind of snowy shapes, and then the rest, just for performance, for low poly's sake, is just flat. And it's not a good solution. I don't think it looks good. There'd be a better way to make a landscape given more time, or like a broader goal. Also, there's no I just kind of forgot to do this. Like, if you can just walk far away and then the snow stops, and if you keep walking, eventually the rolling fog stuff will stop, and you can just keep walking out off the edge of the map. I haven't ever done it. I assume the ice crashes. I think some people have done it because they thought they were getting closer to this outside skybox. There's nothing out there. This is pulling the curtain back a little too far, probably. But like, I should have put, some invisible collision, I think, maybe to stop the player, just in the interest of respecting your time, so you don't wander out all that way. More generally, I think it's better when games let you break them and go places that you shouldn't be able to go. I think that's more interesting. But because there's nothing out there at all, there's nothing interesting to find as a reward to a player who does something that they're not supposed to do, I think it probably would have been better just to block it off. There's a particular post-process volume for the inside, which is taking the raw lighting and moving it from this into this, which is a little darker and a bit warmer, a slightly more of a sort of film curve to it. And then when you head outside, you step into a different bounds. You can see the different volumes for audio and post-processing. But yeah, when you step outside, you step into a new post-process volume, which is dramatically dark, more contrast, bluer, and it also turns on volumetric fog. If you walk through the door fast, it's okay because it happens quickly, and I think you could maybe not notice it. But in practice, every time I've seen someone play it, they stand at the door for a second and then slowly walk through, and you can see the post-process fade in and out and the volumetric fogging come up. So there's got to be a better way to do something like that, but I didn't know how, and I couldn't figure it out. Another part of getting the atmosphere right was the sound. So that's things like snow crunching under your footsteps when you walk outside versus being on concrete or wood on the inside. The sound of swirling winds that change over time, but also the sound of snow fall. And the other part of the sound is the music that plays, which is a song that I wrote. Jump over to Reaper and have a look at the session for that. This is what it looks like in Reaper. There are a fair few tracks and a decent amount of automation happening. So it starts with just this piano. So you have this. More like bell sounding keys blended with a really old rickety piano sound. And the melody is played on cello. That string melody has several other parts that accompany it. The synth line. Extra cello. So the full string section bit. And so towards the end of the song, the melody starts to get overtaken by electronic instruments. So the verse section, which has this bass hit pretty hard. This is a rolly synth played on a C-board, which has this super expressive silicon surface, so you can really lean into the keys and shake them around. Also layered in there is like a thumping kick, just like a heartbeat kind of sound. A lot of effects, sends, reverbs, delays, stuff like that. And then also towards the end, layered in is these whispery, scattered, like just effects stuff, like a ringing bell or people whispering, just like spooky ambient stuff. And then the whole thing gets sort of chewed up by this bit crush. You know, feels like it's disintegrating into the snow and the storm outside. It's not perfect. There's still some work to do on it. But a lot of people seem to really, really like it, or they like the vibe that they're getting when they're out in the snow. So that approach of this dedication to like the fidelity of the real world warehouse and items, we don't actually talk that much about RLM or the guys in the show or the memes and or whatever. It was not so much about that. Like, this project was about, for me, it was about the process of making this stuff. And part of the process is being faithful to the accuracy, or faithful to the real world objects, the relationship of this object to this, and what is the label on that? Can I find what that object is? Can I find some other information about it? The research part of it, of like uncovering what everything is. But it's also about learning new stuff, because this is all just figured out as I go along. The Red Letter Media context is like a generator of new things to learn, and also like a useful frame that sets boundaries of the project. Because it is like a recreation of a real world thing, it is kind of, it obviously falls in somewhere in that category of like here's things you recognize, right? But it's not really about that. It isn't obsessed with the memes or the subculture around the show or any of that kind of stuff. The process of doing it felt more like I was doing the kind of thing people do when they make Deckard's blaster from Blade Runner, when they make replicas of that, or when they make R2-D2s. A large part of that obviously is like the fandom of those movies, but it's also the replica prop builders who have a dedication or obsession or fascination with accuracy. It's not just a obsession or dedication with the movie or the thing. It's the movie making magic kind of thing, where props and sets and costumes I like it, endlessly cool and fascinating. And it's making the replicas is more of like engaging in that kind of atmosphere or that kind of joy, even more than it is pretending R2-D2 is real, or that you really have a Blade Runner gun. So that's more like what it felt like to me. It was more like a appreciation for the sets and props, the filmmaking, the movie magic kind of thing. Except the topic the topic I chose is Red Letter Media. So the stakes are just non-existent. There isn't an existing standard here. Whereas if you make indies whip or something, there's an existing culture and a history to that process, and a set of facts about what is accurate and what isn't. None of that exists for Red Letter Media props. There was no bar to clear. So I knew that I had sort of the patience to do the kind of work that is necessary to get something super accurate. I also knew if I fucked it up, no one's going to notice or care. Watching other people play it, including the Red Letter Media guys, one of the things that it became apparent to me that's important about the accuracy, or being the faithfulness to the accuracy. I think it communicates the amount of care that went into making it. If it was just kind of slapped together and just used things that kind of looked right, there's kind of a carelessness to that implies like a lack of sincerity. The person who made this thing didn't care that much. It's like, maybe you shouldn't either. I cared enough to do it right. So if you play this thing and you're invested in it and you're having a good time, it's not going to be a letdown. It's like, it's safe to enjoy this thing because it's sincere. It's not sarcastic or ironic or detached or anything like that. It feels almost like a contradiction because the show is so often silly. They'll make these like pretty impressive props that must have taken a lot of work to build, to make. Same with the sets. And then they'll drop a safe on it the next episode and destroy it. The Red Letter Media shows are, even though they are silly, they are made with care. And I think they do care about the work being good. You can tell, particularly in the edit, obviously, but like all of the sets that they make and the props that they make, where even if the show is often kind of silly or stupid or like throwaway, it shouldn't necessarily be mistaken for a lack of care in the making and in the final thing. And so I think the obsession with getting it right in the game is a reflection of the same care that they put into the stuff that they make. And I think that's a large part of what people got from it as well, and why the reaction to it was almost like just being really happy when they were playing it. That was a long video. If you're still sticking around, thanks for watching it all. And obviously thanks for playing the game. In terms of downloads and views, this is where it's sort of ended up. You're still kind of getting like 10, 20 downloads a day. Having never done this before, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's a lot or if it's not many. It's obviously way more than I ever expected any of this. Super cool that so many people are having a good time with it. There's a ton of Let's Plays, and they were all super fun. There are a bunch of people who did speed runs, which is pretty funny.
Okay, that's the one. That's the one.
I saw this on TV Tropes. I don't know who made it. Under Heartwarming, there's this article which is like an overview of the release of the game and then Red Letter Media playing it. It's really accurate and it's written really kindly. So that was cool. I was just surprised to see it. Thanks for watching. If you got any other questions, throw them in the comments or find me on Twitter or Reddit or wherever. Cool. Okay, bye.